The British economy, once the world's workshop, appears to have succumbed to a century-long disease. Many observers have dubbed this illness the British disease, because there is no acceptable generic diagnosis. However, there are hints that the disease is spreading, and American industry's recent competitive setbacks in the face of Japanese and European challenges have reignited interest in theories for economic growth and collapse. While it is wrong to categorize Britain as a poor economy, there were periods of relative economic stagnation and decline when compared to other countries. Here are some important issues that contributed to the UK's economic challenges. Great Britain, and particularly England, became one of the world's most successful economic regions between the late 1600s and early 1800s as a result of the Industrial Revolution, which began in the mid-18th century. Industrialization led to Britain being the dominant European and global economic, political, and military power for more than a century. Britain's industrialists were the first to industrialize, revolutionizing manufacturing, communication, and transportation with innovations such as the steam engine for pumps, factories, railway locomotives, and steamships, textile equipment, tool-making, the telegraph, and pioneering the railway system. With these many new technologies, Britain manufactured much of the equipment and products used by other nations, becoming known as the workshop of the world. Its businessmen were leaders in international commerce and banking, trade, and shipping. Its markets encompassed both independent countries and those that were part of the rapidly expanding British Empire, which by the early 1900s had grown to be the world's largest. After 1840, the economic policy of mercantilism was abandoned in favor of free trade, which included less taxes, quotas, and restrictions, as articulated in British economist Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. Following that, the United Kingdom's relative economic performance improved significantly, to the point where, on the eve of the 2007 financial crisis, British income per capita exceeded, albeit marginally, that of France and Germany. Additionally, the income per capita gap between the UK and the USA narrowed significantly. By the end of November 2009, the economy had contracted by 4.9%, making the 2008 to 2009 recession the longest since records began. In December 2009, the Office for National Statistics corrected numbers for the third quarter of 2009, revealing that the economy contracted by 0.2%, compared to a 0.6% drop the previous quarter. It has been stated that the UK initially trailed behind its European neighbors since the UK entered the recession of 2008. Commentators suggested that the UK experienced a slightly longer recession than other large European countries as a result of government policies dating back to the Thatcher government in 1979, during which UK governments shifted away from supporting manufacturing and towards the financial sector. The OECD expects that the UK will increase by 1.6% in 2010. The Labour Force survey reported that the unemployment rate dropped in the fourth quarter of 2009, making it the first of the EU's three major economies to do so. The Office for National Statistics, ONS, reported that GDP fell by 0.2% in the third quarter of 2009, following a 0.6% drop in the second quarter. The decline was 2.4% in the first quarter of 2009. By October 2009, the economy had contracted 5.9% from its peak before the recession began. Recent short-term economic news in Britain has been captivating, dramatic, and at times irritating. But it's nothing compared to the far bigger issue that lies beneath the headlines. Britain has been falling behind for 15 years and has a very narrow window of opportunity to catch up. The last few months have been difficult for the United Kingdom. Energy prices are increasing. National inflation has hit double digits. The longest-serving British king has died. The shortest-serving prime minister has resigned. Britain currently faces a toxic combination of low growth and excessive inequality. Britain needs to take this situation seriously and devise a strategy to address it. Typical British homes are now 10% poorer than their French counterparts, while the poorest fifth of households are 20% poorer. It explains why, despite massive government support, so many people throughout the country are struggling to keep up with rising food and energy prices. Today, the UK's poorest households spend 60% of their budgets on these items, which are the most difficult for families to cut down on, up from 51% in the mid-2000s. All G7 economies were affected by COVID-19 and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The UK is the only advanced economy that has not returned to pre-pandemic levels of output. The forecast is significantly worse. Catherine Mann, an external member of the BOE's MPC, stated in a speech last month that the BOE's prognosis was far less bullish than the US Federal Reserve and the European Central Bank. The latter two predict the US and Eurozone economies to be 7% and 10% larger, respectively, by the end of 2025 than they were before the coronavirus outbreak. The Bank of England does not expect the UK economy to have risen at all during that time period. Britain's GDP declined more during the epidemic, in part because the Office for National Statistics was more stringent in assessing output in schools, hospitals, and other public services than other countries. If the services were closed, they provided no output. This was just a transitory effect, and the UK's recovery after the lockdowns was stronger than that of other countries for the same reason. The United Kingdom was also heavily exposed to Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the rise in wholesale natural gas prices because UK households use gas more than other countries to heat their homes, and despite its success in decarbonization, the country is more reliant on the fuel for electricity generation than most. However, these variables are insufficient to explain why the UK economy has not recovered its GDP level since the end of 2019. Economists refer to three distinct British barriers to economic performance. The first is Brexit, which has boosted import prices, created uncertainty for businesses, increased trade barriers, complicated regulatory compliance, and hampered worker recruitment. Even if the UK's economic performance has been worse since 2016 than it was during the austerity period, analysts continue to debate the causes of the initial decrease in the growth rate from 2010 to 2016. Those close to George Osborne, the then Chancellor, referred to the UK's massive financial system, which is heavily exposed to a worldwide banking catastrophe, a weakening North Sea oil sector, and a global productivity problem. This weakness of the UK's previously strongest sectors and companies has been confirmed by numerous studies, most recently by the Centre for Cities, which also discovered that London's productivity growth has fallen from nearly double that of the rest of the UK to lagging behind other parts of the country. However, the disappointments that British citizens faced in the early 2010s, when compound annual growth rates were still above 2%, were minor in comparison to what has occurred since then. In the latter time, there is far less dispute about the underlying causes of bad economic performance. There is little doubt that one of the most serious restrictions on development has been the regular external shocks affecting the British economy and many other advanced economies. The second British problem, according to Julian Jessup, a fellow at the Free Market Institute of Economic Affairs, is the government's tendency to flip-flop from one notion to the next since 2016. It's been a period of high uncertainty, and companies have spent loads of time staying afloat rather than building their businesses, he said. He adds that increased taxes and regulations, particularly in the financial and energy sectors, haven't helped matters. The third UK issue on the charge sheet is a sudden and unexpected downturn in the country's labor market performance during the pandemic. Although corporations continue to supply more jobs to UK citizens than the European average, fewer people are either employed or seeking for work than in 2019. This nearly unprecedented reduction in labor force participation, particularly among those over 50, is expected to continue, according to the BOE, because many of the people who have left the labor force appear unlikely to return soon. How does today's Britain compare to other wealthy countries? The response becomes progressively uncomfortable. Despite experiencing many of the same issues, such as an aging population, the climate crisis, and the shrinking benefits to most people from modern capitalism, Britain appears to be struggling more than other Western countries. From deteriorating education and transport infrastructure to slow productivity, unusually high inflation, and relatively poor public health, it appears to be falling behind traditional peers such as France and Germany, while being steadily caught up by previously much poorer societies such as Slovenia and Poland. The UK economy's growth issue after 2007 can thus be attributed to a combination of global crises and self-inflicted policy blunders. That the demise of large UK boom industries, global shocks, Brexit, bad governance, and a failing labor market have created a poisonous environment. Several complicated and interconnected factors are putting strain on the UK economy. These issues, which include, among other things, inflation, the ongoing war in Ukraine, and stagnant living standards, have resulted in a weak economy that policymakers are struggling to manage. It is vital to recognize that Britain's economic situation is always changing and influenced by a range of variables, including global economic trends, technology advancements, government policies, and sociological changes. While the country has faced economic challenges in the past, it also possesses significant skills in finance, technology, and innovation. Addressing structural issues and adjusting to shifting economic landscapes will continue to shape Britain's economic trajectory into the future.